Thanks, Harry. We're going to have about 15 minutes for questions. Now, yesterday I flipped to the Slido screen. The thing is, I don't think my Slido screen is coordinated with what these guys have. Maybe it might make more sense for me to trust me that I'm going to go through some of this stuff. Some of it hiding behind the shield of anonymous comments, which is very much a sign of the times, as Prince would say. Some of the comments or questions are starting to become unpleasant, which is not a surprise. That's the sign of the times. So you're going to have to trust me in what is going to be asked and answered, in what is not going to be here. But all of you can look at what everybody else has done. It's the same as the exercise I do with my students. I repeat, lecture 1, what's your name? And I got a whole rollout of pornographic material until I put it up on the screen. And people said, oh, heck, I'm now on the private public sphere, right? So I'm going to start with a really simple one addressed to my friend Cedric. How much does it cost to plant a tree? Do you get that? It costs nothing to plant a tree. Can we still plant trees in a place where there is no soil? Can we still find soil? You can bring soil, okay? This is just to start up this whole thing about trees, which is something that some of us, a lot of us, really are very passionate about. Hossein, do you believe the new era of internet, TV internet, is degrading bloggers, since influencers like to give themselves the title of video blogger? I think you're mic'd up. I think you are mic'd up, yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
But I don't think it's working.
So working?
It's not working. It is.
Yeah, go.
No, it's a different... I mean, personally, yes. Personally, I think, and I guess Neil Postman also agrees, that you cannot argue with images. You can invoke people, you can provoke people into feeling different things. You can feel with images, but you can't argue with images. For arguments, for rational arguments, you need text. So there is a downgrade already happening when you have this civilizational shift, mode of communication shifting from text to images in a way, because then you can't convey many sophisticated messages. And especially when it comes to, I mean, let me give you an example. You can easily talk about abstract ideas. When you write things in text, you can talk about abstract ideas, but you can talk about love, pain, beauty, clean air and all those things. But when it comes to pictures, you always talk about the specifics. You cannot talk about abstract things. It's always tied to a certain time and space, for example. This is what Postman says. So there is a fundamental difference between these two modes of communications. And but at the same time, it's a reality. It's changed. Okay. And I think we have to adapt to it. So that's why, for example, in my suggestion about taking the presidential debates from television to radio is a very pragmatic solution, because we can't take it back to text, obviously. It would be hundreds of thousands of words. But there is a middle way, there's a middle ground, and I think radio would be that. So as far as, as well as I'm very pessimistic about this shift, but I'm also very pragmatic. And I think there are some third-way solutions.
This is a question for Natalie. Natalie set up a distinction between proximity, affinity, and solidarity. Are not all three focused on different forms of commonality? How is solidarity concrete?
Yeah, that's a great question. So solidarity does not presume agreement or any prior shared characteristics. And so I can, in fact, be in solidarity with my enemy. I can be in solidarity with someone with whom I profoundly disagree. What solidarity entails is a kind of unconditional commitment to the well-being of the other and the well-being of the collective, which in the moment might actually imply radical contestation. So I might have to kill my enemy, but I can still be in solidarity with that person. And so solidarity isn't about the particular content of the engagement, or whether I'm nice or they're nice, or whether we enjoy the interaction. It has to do with the outcome that we're solving for together, intersubjectively. Whereas affinity communities are predicated on some form of shared commonality. And this also makes them vulnerable to splintering whenever there's disagreement or difference. And so it's not that there's not a role for affinity communities. There certainly is. They're very important, actually, in consolidation of identity, in working out relationship between self and world, in finding the initial solidarities that can grow into something more universal. But they are characterized by that limitation, which we're seeing play out in real time in the public sphere.
Okay, there's a comment, and then something which I suggest may be better placed in the Young People Summit. Comment. To minorities and LGBT community, truth as a consensus is dangerous when the other side denies your existence or your reality. Losing the debate means possible death. This one is the one which, again, it's like the rage against the machine in me still, I kind of tweak to these things because I can relate to it. Some teachers in Malta discourage and warn students not to participate in protests and to avoid political discussion. Shouldn't this issue be addressed? Shall we leave it for the afternoon? And I won't even tell you what my comment would be on that one. John, and then John at some stage, people started talking about technology and AI. John said, comment, a lot of famous non-AI specialists make nonsense claims about AI. AI will change the employment landscape. There is no Skynet. And in a way, this was going in, why should... Cole, I can quote Cole as being a brave person who actually put down his name, right? Cole said, why should we get more education if at this rate, AI or automation are able to replace our jobs? To which John replied, or maybe that's another question, as AI automation comes in, is it still realistic to aim for 100% adult employment, or should we think of productive leisure? To the panel. Yes, Harry.
So the great question. In 1933, John Maynard Keynes published an essay arguing that in his grandchildren's time, people will work 2 or 3 hours a week and have lives of leisure and read Shakespeare and the like, and painted a very rosy picture of the future. And for many people, this was a sort of expectation. I think what we're seeing now is that many governments have decided, whether we agree that it's true or not, that they will not be able to guarantee full employment. So they've instituted guaranteed income programs for people. There's been several experiments. There's a huge debate about this. But it is, if you think about it, an admission by some governments that they won't be able to guarantee full employment. Now, this is contrary to many economists' beliefs. A lot of economic historians have said that other technological revolutions have come and they did displace some kinds of jobs, but actually created more jobs. So this is one expectation of the current technological revolution. But I don't think that in any scenario, having less education, whatever you want to call it, knowledge, will be a negative thing for people. I think even if it is a Keynes' life of leisure, you'd still want some level of education. So I think there's still both a sort of vocational benefit and a social benefit to education, regardless of where we go on employment or leisure type of argument.
I wanted to ask you, I wanted to ask you, so, there is all this scaremongering about AI and the loss of employment, loss of jobs and so on. And I was reading, especially in the cases, let's say, of like truck drivers, like 90% of that job is gonna, or more is gonna be. So I'm just wondering, how well do you think the World Bank or other organizations are prepared for scenarios of job loss, basically? And what does this mean? Like, how do you then take people that do this kind of jobs, and retrain them? Because there's a theory that maybe in 50 years there'll be like some super human league where they're going to have access to everything, and then there's going to be the rest of us that are not going to have access to the same kind of like healthcare or and so on. So basically, theories also about universal basic income, that if there is such automation and people lose their jobs, there's going to be a sea of people that literally are given some basic income, and because they cannot be retrained, they're considered useless and like category Z or whatever. So there's a lot of scary science fictional kind of post-humanism stories and where humanity is going. Like, what is your view on this, having looked at this? Yeah,
so I think the most famous study is the Oxford study that argued that 47% of jobs in the U.S. will be affected by automation. And the study was misinterpreted that it was suggesting job loss. They were saying jobs would be affected. So they could be affected positively. Okay. But the important part of this is that it goes against the sort of development model that many countries have, that you go from agriculture surplus to building higher skills and then going to manufacturing. But manufacturing is not going to come to all countries. We're not going to have the same model that allowed the East Asian tigers to develop. So the idea that it's manufacturing jobs is going to be the savior for countries will probably not be the reality. We're seeing a decline in manufacturing jobs around the world, except for Asia. So the need for exporting countries to build factories in other countries will disappear in the near future because of technology. So that means the preparation of the way we organized our school system was the expectation of some kind of factory manufacturing jobs. Even the way we organized the classroom, the way that the school day is organized was an industrial model, expecting people to work in some kind of manufacturing plant. That needs to change, otherwise people will be very disappointed, very scared about the future. So that's where I think we're trying to build the evidence base. The question of job loss retraining is very real, because people's skills will be affected. Are they going to be prepared? Do we have the mechanisms to support them? There are many subsidy programs around the world that are not designed towards retraining, but rather trying to keep people at a decent standard of living, which is fine. But the ability to train and retrain needs to be built in many, many systems, and that's something that's quite nascent.
I think we just have about enough time. First, there's one question which kind of intrigued me, and this has nothing to do with the Hussein or not Hussein, and because as I said, all of it is offline and online. And by the way, anybody who wants to engage with Hussein is going to be at university tomorrow, speaking to students within my faculty, and we're going to have a fairly open discussion about his world, our world, this kind of stuff which was discussed in terms of reality and fakes, identities, and how we live our lives. This question which really intrigues me, which says, would it be useful to teach people, children, parents, and educators, to like what they don't necessarily like, to have a more diverse news feed. So this, to me, strikes me as anything from getting out of our own echo chambers to people like me engaging with people I have a difficulty engaging with, for instance, personally, people who voted for Brexit, for instance, trying to get out of mindset. So I'm just flinging this out to you, and then if there's one final question from someone, if anybody got a mic, let's go for it. We're late, okay? A bit late, so we're going to have to go for things. Please. Yeah, do you have any comments? Question? Maria at the back. Can somebody...
My question's to Harry. I'll be honest, I found your presentation disturbing. Do you see any scope for education beyond learning for labour? And when we speak about the future of financing education, do we really need to look at the neoliberal model? Is it not a public good? Can we just speak about redistribution?
Sorry to be depressing about that, but the model of financing has nothing to do with neoliberal. I think somebody has to pay for education, and the model that we have now is creating greater inequality, and a reliance on the model of mostly public finance will lead to greater inequality. We're seeing that in many countries in the world. It's leading to less access to education for people from poor backgrounds, and a growing inequality in those skills. So this is not going to help by expanding that model. The only alternative we have is private finance, which would definitely increase inequality. So some kind of future financing model that taps the earnings of graduates into the future. This has been tried in many countries. Australia went from being one of the lowest enrollment rates to one of the highest in the OECD, precisely because of their income contingent program. On whether education has other benefits, I said has many, many other benefits besides employment, but one of those benefits is the ability to get a job, a better job, in order to actualize what you want out of life. And I think that's something that people have used continuously. So it's not a question of narrowing it, but rather to expand it. And right now we're not seeing a model that's expanding opportunity, that's actually leading to greater inequality. So one or the other has to change. Either we accept that we're going to have a system that builds inequality, or we need to find ways to address that and create opportunities for everyone.
One more question.
Yeah, I'm afraid I'm going to have to disagree with Hussein about what he said about images. It's something which we will be exploring in the workshop later on, in the discussion later on. The point is this: I do see where you're coming from in the sense of the contrast between the symbolic coding of text as opposed to the more concrete coding of images. But the point is that, first of all, I mean, even in the symbolic coding of text and the best literature, you're going to have something so incredibly visual, so incredibly impacting, that it will be very much, will have the strength that you were actually talking about. Regarding images, I think that images can actually be some of the most ambiguous, some of the most, totally non-concrete ways of communicating. In fact, the more advanced, I mean, we're to look at art. I mean, Picasso and all the rest of them, obviously. I mean, Demoiselle d'Avignon isn't exactly sort of, something that you latch onto. It is an image. But the more advanced we get in technologies, deep fakes and Photoshop having reached a point where you can't really tell whether I'm faking something or not, okay? The ambiguity at the core of it is something that is already sort of, becoming part of our incredulity, if you like, as regards images. But we'll discuss this more later when we have the discussion. Okay? Thanks.
Okay. We're going to break for a quick coffee. I think we had 20 minutes. If we can try and get back within 15 minutes, then we can back on schedule. Thanks very much, guys.